We're living in times right now where scale really matters. And I think scale is one of these things which still I find people struggle to grapple with in every corner of everyone's life in the world, in fact.
You can't transform a life that person doesn't feel like they matter to. They have to feel like they matter to you or to the system or to the org, but it's usually a person, it's usually an organization. AI tools are going to empower us to do technical things really fast. The training and the education that's going to matter most are things like critical thinking, creativity, sense making, thinking across systems. Those are the skills I need to have.
Before we jump into this week's episode, a quick heads up. My conversation with Dr. LeBlanc went on for much longer than we expected and packed so much valuable content we simply found it too good to cut down to our usual show length. So we've decided to bring it to you in two parts. In part one, you'll meet Paul LeBlanc, a genuine trailblazer in American higher education. We delve into the unconventional thinking and student-centric approach that underpinned SNHU success. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Relearning Work, where we dive into the future of learning and work. In each episode, we bring you conversations with leaders from industry and education to challenge assumptions, propose ideas, and share learnings as we all navigate this world that is being reshaped by agentic AI. Now, whether you're an educator, a student, or a business executive looking to stay ahead in this rapidly changing landscape, there's something here for you. I'm your host, David Yip. My guest today is Dr. Paul J. LeBlanc, a true trailblazer and giant of American higher education. Growing up in poverty as a first-generation college student, Paul went on to orchestrate one of the most dramatic institutional transformations in education history. He took over as president of Southern New Hampshire University in 2003. A little-known third-rate undergraduate business school with 2,800 students, no endowment, and a budget that was barely in the black, and grew it to become one of America's biggest universities by enrollment, with over 250,000 students at last count. Paul's been named one of the most innovative people in higher education by Fast Company, featured in the Chronicle of Higher Education, listed by Forbes as one of the most influential people in higher education, and received the prestigious TIAA Institute Theodore M. Hesburgh Award for Leadership Excellence in Higher Education. Since retiring from SNHU last year, he has co-founded Matter in Space, reimagining human development for the age of AI. So honored to have you on the show today, Paul.
David, that was such a lovely intro. Thank you so much. It's really great to be with you.
It's fantastic. You have a really interesting background as well, a very long history in higher education. Could you give us a bit of a backstory of how you got here as well, and now with such a exciting startup as well?
Dave, when you say a long history, are you referring to my age? Because I'm in my 60s, so I have been around a long time. And it's funny, there's been a bit of a sort of, I don't mean to sound immodest, but a sort of awards lately. And my wife says, honey, that just means you're getting old. It's recognition for longevity. But the beginning of that journey was quite accidental in some ways. Because as a working class kid, you mentioned growing up in relative poverty. And I don't want to make it sound like deprivation. I had loving parents and they worked hard. My mother worked in a factory till she was in her 70s, and my dad was a laborer in construction sites. And I was the first in my family to go to college. And not only first in my family, first in my neighborhood. So we didn't know anyone who went to college. And it was a sixth grade teacher who said to my mother during a parent conference one time, Paul could go to college someday. And that hit her like a lightning bolt. Like that was, she also cleaned homes. She was a housekeeper. And it was the children of those families that went to college, not the children of the families in our neighborhood. So she really held on to that dream. Do you know how that would happen, how that worked? I mean, I literally knew nothing about it, but she just had this notion that I was going to go to college. And I think she was the driving force that, when I left high school, it was like, I was going to college. And then I was really lucky enough to have access to affordable, high quality education. And I watched it transform my life, right? My world got bigger. And when you have great teachers, starting with that sixth grade teacher, right? What does a great teacher do? They hold you accountable for bigger dreams, for your potential. And I can name the teachers that transformed my life. And I bet you could too, David. And I asked this question, everyone knows the names right away. For me, it was Mr. Schlafman in 6th grade, who I mentioned, and Betsy Collins in high school, who was just, she was my great mentor and helped me fill out my college applications when my parents didn't know what to do. And then I had an undergraduate professor, Dr. Helen Heineman, who said to me in my senior year, "Where are you going to graduate school?" I was like, "Graduate school? I'm lucky to get out of undergraduate. What are you talking about?" And she kind of took me by the scruff of the neck and said, "No, you're going to graduate school." And, different day, right? She could make a phone call to the department chair she was friends with at Boston College, a good Jesuit university, and said, "I have somebody and you need to find a way to get him, find a spot for him." He's like, "Okay, Helen, tell him to come in tomorrow," that kind of thing, And I tell this to my daughters who are academics, and they roll their eyes like, "Really? Like, that's how your world worked back then?" It's like, yeah, that's how old it is. So, but, I discovered a love of teaching and a love of ideas, and I'd always been the kid with his nose in the book. So it felt very at home in that world. But it was when I got in front of a classroom with students that I really felt like I found my calling. I need to be in this space. And it's driven by that sense of, I was the great beneficiary of what we in the U.S. often call the great American dream, that, you could sort of have this transformational, the idea that the class and situation into which you are born is not your destiny. That's always been the promise of America. I don't know if it holds up anymore, to be honest with you, in some ways. But what I was worried about as I moved through, a faculty, my doctoral program, and the faculty role, the department chair role, and increasing leadership, was my American dream story available to a new immigrant kid from Haiti? Is it as available to a Dominican kid? Is it as available to Black and brown kids? I mean, I tell that story like it was this, American dream story, but I was also male and I was also white, and I'm cognizant of the structural privilege that comes with that. So that really has fueled my work. I've always been interested in how do we extend post-secondary education to more people? How do we make opportunity available? How do we transform lives? And in SNHU, it was my second presidency. I was at another place, a wonderful little liberal arts college, since closed, but for 7 years I was there, and I really learned a lot. Came under the influence of Clay Christensen, the great Harvard Business School professor who writes about disruptive innovation, was a friend of 40 years. We met before he was famous. We met playing basketball in a gym in Cambridge, Mass. But, he was on my board at Southern New Hampshire University and very much influences my thinking still today. He passed away, as you probably know, a couple of years ago. A great man and a great thinker. So that's the story. It's kind of an accidental story. And what's interesting, because I know so many successful leaders, very few of them took a straightforward path. Like, no, someone said to me, "So Paul, did you always want to, like when you were a kid, did you want to be a university president?" I was like, what kind of geeky kid would have answered that question? I'm like, no, I wanted to be a cop or a fireman like every other boy in my neighborhood. What are you talking about? But, so here we are, far into a career, and it's been incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. And that's what a wonderful impact as well. Such a huge impact that you've made, as turning Southern New Hampshire into the largest. And I think I said before at the intro is 250,000, but what's the number now? Because you're growing so quickly.
Yeah. So when I stepped down last June, so just a year ago, we were 250. And it's funny, I know they've grown since, because I had record enrollments again in the fall, and they just did the May graduation. It's their biggest graduation ever. So we do 4 graduations in the fall, in the spring, and 4 more now in the late fall, just to be able to accommodate all of the graduates. And they're amazing stories. You talk about the transformation of SNHU as an organization, but the reality is the win is when you sort of see these students walk across the stage, and they have had remarkable lives, and they're gritty. They work hard. Like, one of my favorites last year was a guy who was a long distance truck driver. And then in the U.S., there's a limit on how many hours you can drive in a day. So when he was reaching his limit, he would find a rest area that had Wi-Fi, and he'd park his rig as close as he could to that building. And then he'd turn the truck off and open up his laptop. And for the next couple of hours, he was a student. And he liked to joke that he earned his degree in all 48 states because he was a cross-country driver. Yeah. Or, we have, I think, 18% are military students, veterans, are active duty. They're kind of remarkable stories, And people sometimes, I was on a panel this morning on stage here in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I live, and with a woman who was a really well-respected longtime bank president in our local community, was a graduate. She took 11 years. So she had started as a teller, and she worked her way through the bank. She had a couple of kids. She chipped away a course at a time. And she said in this panel, one of her proudest moments was walking across the stage and getting her degree and having her kids rooting for her from the audience, right? That's a very typical SNHU student.
See, the thing that really amazes me with SNHU, the whole transformation story, going from just literally a couple of thousand students to a couple of 100,000 students, it's really shows what imagination and ambition and really achieving scale means, and we're living in times right now where scale really matters, with AI touches everyone's lives. And I think scale is one of these things which still I find people struggle to grapple with in every corner of everyone's life in the world, in fact. And education is so important to underpin all that, to equip people with the right skills and the right mindset to be able to thrive in this world of AI. And first and foremost, education leaders need to be able to achieve transformation at scale. And you've done that.
And I think I wrote a book in 2022 called Broken, wrote it during the pandemic, and the subtitle is How Our Social Systems Are Failing Us and How We Can Fix Them. And I spent a lot of time interviewing people who were working on scale within what I would call social systems or systems of care. So K-12 education, post-secondary, healthcare, mental health treatment, addiction treatment, right? These are all systems that are meant to lift people up, right? To transform people in some fashion, make them better. And these innovators were figuring out how to scale and still do quality. Because this is the thing that people always think, like at 250,000, you can't be doing quality. And it's like, no, it's the opposite. I would stack up what we do in terms of student experience, which is like a 94% of SNHU students say if they had to do it all over again, they would come back to SNHU. But what all of those innovators have done and what we do at SNHU is we ask this question, which is, when I think about the work, what's being asked of me, whether it's mental health treatment or higher education or K-12, think about what's asked of me. What are the most important human relationships at the heart of the work? And then let me use technology and systems design to scale the hell out of everything else. But so often when people think of scale, they reverse it. They say, how can I use technology to get humans out of the mix? Because when humans are in the mix, they're expensive, they're messy, they don't scale very well. And the result of that is you often get systems that are pretty heartless. But the real innovators, and what we did at SNHU is we reversed and said, wait a minute, we use humans for lots of stuff that our students don't really need us to use humans for. Like, I don't need to talk to somebody if I'm just checking the balance of my tuition bill, or I want to look at this question, I need to know the calendar and all these other things, right? Like, we don't need humans for that. But what we did realize is that for our learners, they're online, they're working full time, they've got kids, they're often studying late at night. It can feel very isolating. And one of the things that is really critical, and I learned this, and when I wrote Broken, I was interviewing psychologists and sociologists. And what's really important is what they would say, and it's pretty conclusive. You can't transform a life if that person doesn't feel like they matter to you. They have to feel like they matter to you or to the system or to the org, but it's usually a person. It's usually not an organization. And if you look at people who have overcome amazing adversity, they never cite a program, a policy, or a system. You know what they cite, David? They cite a person, someone who believed in me, someone who lifted me up. And when we talk about the most transformative moments in our education, we almost always talk about a person, the way I did, the 3 teachers who changed my life. And I ask audiences all the time, can you name them? Everyone can name them. Don't even have to think about it. Like, they know the names. So when I looked at SNHU, what we realize is that we're very big and students are online. So they don't go to a classroom. They don't get to meet physically with students. It can feel very isolating. And they go from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher. So we did something a little counterintuitive. We said the primary relationship isn't a teacher to a student. I mean, that doesn't sound like education. It's like, no, we need our teachers to be really good. They have to unlock learning when the students get stuck. They have to really be there for students. They have to guide and so on. But their advisor stays with you through your whole journey. And that advisor, they know you. They know where you struggle. They get to know you because they're talking to you all the time. They know when your kids are like, we call them academic advisors, but I think of them as life coaches. And they're undergirded using powerful CRM. We use Salesforce at SNHU. We know when students are struggling. We know when someone should have performed better. We have a system that prompts the advisor, hey, you should call David today. Like, he's not logged in for 4 days. That's not like him. That's not the pattern. Hey, Dave, what's going on? Oh, so sorry. My kids are sick. Work is crazy. I'll catch up this weekend. Great. But I might say, what's going on? And you say, I don't know. I think it's time to throw in the towel. What was I thinking? I don't have time for college. I'm exhausted. My kids are driving me crazy. And it's in those conversations in which an advisor often saves a student. Because our students, in some ways, I sometimes say they're incredibly gritty and resilient, but they also skate on thin ice. We love serving underserved learners, low-income learners, learners where we know that if we can be successful, it will change their life. But it means we have to work a lot harder. Our advisors, for example, if a student says that they're struggling to buy course materials because they're really up against it, and it's like course materials or groceries, they can send them an ATM card, a gift card, a debit card, and they don't have to ask permission. Like, hey, I'm going to send you a card, like, buy the materials, like, we're going to take care of you. If someone says, oh my God, my antiquated computer just broke down, I don't know how I'm going to do my assignments, that advisor can go grab a Google Chromebook, throw it in an overnight package and mail it. Because we know that it's in those moments that we can save a student. And look, from a business perspective, if I lose that student, the lifetime value of that student is just diminished. Like, oh yeah, so it cost me $400 for a Chromebook. But if I have that student for another 2 years who's paying $1,000 a course and using financial aid, it's also good for us. But more importantly, it's good for the student. Sorry, that's a long answer to your question, but I think the heart of the scaling question, and it's a little counterintuitive, but start with the human relationships that are most important. And that observation is going to be even more important in the age of AI, because AI will do so much that humans can do, and will do it better. But we better figure out where the critical human relationships are, and make sure that we hold that ground sacred. 2 years ago, I was saying, I still have to keep a human in the loop because these AI systems are faulty and they hallucinate, etc. Now I say you need to keep a human in the loop because these systems are so freaking good. Like, they're just that powerful. Like, if we're not careful, we're going to lose the critical human relationships. So we can talk about the dangers and the great benefits of AI. I'm very excited about it, but I'm also lose sleep over it. We're early, but yeah, human relationships are critical.
There's so much you just mentioned there. I really want to drill into, but you mentioned a few times as well, unconventional, or you got to go think about something from first principles almost. But that really goes to, I think, assumptions, right? When you need to scale, you got to really go back and really check some assumptions or get into the right mindset. Otherwise, you might think perfectly good solutions or approaches might not be suitable because there's some underlying assumption that you've been operating within. And so I think that's what you're saying, really. When we need to think scale or operate quite differently, we have to really understand what are some of the underlying assumptions we are using to drive certain behaviors or building our business models around.
That's right. And especially as we build our offerings and our organizations, higher education is particularly guilty of treating it from a supply side perspective. Like, we come up with things that we just assume that students should want. It's not unusual, like, hey, we dreamed up this program and let's market it. And like, why isn't anybody coming? It's like, did you spend any time talking to students first? So I think, I'm a huge fan of jobs to be done theory. I don't know if you know this body of work. It actually came from my aforementioned friend, Clay Christensen. And for your viewers or listeners who aren't familiar with it, jobs to be done theory basically argues that when someone gives us their resources, they write a check, they give us their time, whatever, whether it's a product or a service, but not just education, anything for which someone's paying you to do for something, they're buying something from you, but it's to get a job done. So the easiest way to think about this is when you go to the hardware store, you're not really buying a drill. I mean, you're buying a drill, but the job is a hole. You need a hole. And if I'm on the supply side, if I'm creating drills, it really benefits me if I can understand better in detail, what is the job you're trying to do? So if you're a homeowner putting up some shelving, you probably don't need a super expensive steel heavy duty drill. You need something that's cheap, plastic, easy to use, gets the job done. You're just putting up shelving. If you own a big construction firm and you're going to be drilling through concrete all day, every day, you need a big, heavy duty, high voltage, et cetera, right? If I get those wrong, if I'm trying to sell the second one to the homeowner and the first one to the construction guy, we miss each other. And this is the key to jobs to be done theory. It's like you really have to dig in with your user. So when we started to scale online, what we realized is that a lot of what we were doing with our online students, a small online program when I arrived, was actually doing the job that 18-year-olds living on our campus wanted done. And the jobs that an 18-year-old wants is they're twofold job. They want a degree, obviously, that will give them a career, but they also have what I would call a coming of age job, which is I want to get out from under my parents. I want to figure out who I am. I want to stay up till 3 a.m. talking about the meaning of life. I want to fall in love. I want to study abroad. I want to play on a sports team. I want to reinvent my identity. I didn't like who I was in high school. I want to grow up. And they largely do. When you talk to a university student in Australia 3 years later, in America 4 years later, pretty different human beings. They've had a coming of age, maybe still in formation, but they've changed a lot in those 3-4 years. When I talk to my 32-year-old online student working full time, got 2 kids, maybe did a stint in Iraq or Afghanistan in the military, they've had all the coming of age they can handle. They know what their life is about. Their job to be done is get me a credential at a price I can afford as fast as possible that will allow me to make my life better and take better care of my family. It's a very different thing. And the number one, the job they want is convenience, because it's hard. They're working all day, right? They're coming home, they got to take care of their family, and they got to somehow squeeze in studies. That 18-year-olds, all they're doing all day is I got all day to think about being a college student, not my 32-year-old. Yeah. So one of the things we did at SNHU is we said, convenience really matters. So what are the things that would be different for our online students? Well, one is we're going to make all their administrative processes really easy, because that student on campus, they can, in a lunch break during the day, walk over to the registrar's office. My guy who's driving a tractor trailer can't do that. And oftentimes, if you ask students to say, hey, we need you to do this, reach this office, if it's after 4:30, that office is closed. Well, most of our students don't get home till after 5. So, right, we had to start thinking that we kept our offices open till midnight. You can call in the evening. You can call on the weekends. We have that staffed. 65% of our students come to us with credits from other schools. And we said, it's a real pain in the neck to chase down certified transcripts in America. And you have to pay $10, call the registrar's office. And they're like, what's a registrar? Like, I don't remember. Like, college was 10 years ago when I went there. And I called, but their office was already closed, but I don't get home till 5. So I said, look, let's make this easier for you. Click on this box on the website. You just given us permission. We'll chase down your transcripts for you. We even pay the $10 fee. Even though you never come, we've paid your $10 fee for that transcript. And oftentimes it's 2 or 3 transcripts. So we got really, really focused on, and all of these things don't sound like a big deal, but you put it together and now all of a sudden your offering is quite distinctive. And we, our students often graduate 4 times the rate of students in other colleges that serve the same population. But it's because we work so hard, and it's really, really student focused.
Yeah. So student focus, jobs to be done, really get back to basics, go to first principles, and look at things, focus on your customer or your student in this particular case.
Yeah, and if you ask most university students, you know what universities never do? They never ask students what they want. I mean, they may do like this little survey once a year that no one does anything with. But if you ask, for most university students, you're made to feel lucky if you get in. You go in on the university's terms, not your terms, right? It's a one-size-fits-all. Like, this is how we design. This is how University of Melbourne works. If you don't like it, apply someplace else. But this is, if you come here, this is how this works. It's, in many ways, higher education is built to serve its own interest, less than it's built to serve the interest of individual students. I know that sounds like a harsh thing to say, but at least in the U.S., we do a poor job for a lot of people.
And I think that's quite common. In fact, it goes back to the need to, particularly at this point in time, to go back to what's our core reason for being. Why do we exist? Do we exist to teach? Do we exist to, research? Do we exist to, get people jobs? Or let's just go back to understand what's our core purpose.
That's right. And if you ask any university president or leader, they'll say, no, we're all about students. But if you then dig under the hood and say, okay, what gets rewarded at your institution? Where's the money flow? So all of those innovators I interviewed in Broken, when I wrote Broken, one of the great lessons is like, look at budgets and look where the money goes. Look what gets rewarded, what gets not funded. And a lot of universities, the money goes to, no, we're going to reward publishing. We're going to reward scholarship. We're going to love you if you do research. In fact, a lot of schools, the more prestigious, the fewer students you're asked to actually engage with. Like the workloads at prestigious schools in terms of teaching tend to go down because they want you publishing. They want you out there in the world. So they can say they're about students, but that's really not what they're about. They're about other markers of status. And then I think it's perfectly okay if a university said, hey, we're really about research. Like that's why we live. And yeah, we accommodate students and we do a good job for them, but that's not our principle. But no university will ever say that. But lots of universities live that.
So I want to really talk about then, once we get into the right, I guess, headspace and, focus on what we need to do to achieve scale. The other thing is actually to make it happen. And you've made it happen. But you mentioned Clay Christensen before. One of the things he talks about is the innovator's dilemma, right? And some of these universities, they could be really, really successful and very highly ranked, lots of students, and have been quite comfortable for a long time. But now, when you need to change or need to be able to disrupt yourself, almost, it's very, very difficult. You mentioned, look at where the incentives, the money flows, and these systems are kind of put in place to keep the status quo almost. How do you change at such a large scale because you're fighting this big system?
So big, well-established, prestigious, well-funded schools can't disrupt themselves. There are no examples of this. And this is Clay's research. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they don't have vision. What his research pointed out was just the opposite, which is that when they try to change, their customers say, no, what are you talking about? Like, I like this. This is what I'm here for. I want this, right? So if you look at the schools that have been really transformationally changed in the U.S. context, they are schools that don't fit the profile of status, wealthy, and long established. So SNHU, as you said, kind of a third tier, unknown. It was easier to make big change. Western Governors University, almost the same size as SNHU, about the same size, created out of whole cloth. Didn't have, right? It's easier to build a house than renovate a house. They were able to build it in a very different way. Some of the public schools like University of Maryland Global Campus is a wholly online university within the Maryland system. But they didn't attach it to an existing university. In the system, they said, no, this isn't going to be attached to an existing. This is going to be a standalone by itself. And that's why it was successful. In contrast, when the University of Florida tried to do University of Florida online, the main campus, the flagship campus, University of Florida, used its political muscle to say, no, it should really be attached to us because we have a great brand and et cetera. And they killed it because they can't think so differently, right? They have to satisfy other stakeholders. So when you think about, and what Clay would say is that an Arizona State University, where Michael Crow has done an amazing job transforming that place, that was sort of a second tier laughingstock school. He wasn't, so when you are in those places, your people are typically hungry to be better. They may want to look conventional. So when I came to SNHU in 2003 and I was in the search process, everyone said, we want to get to the next level. And they would define that very differently maybe than I ended up defining it. So not everyone was happy with the way, but we were able, like there was readiness and hunger for something different. Makes life a lot easier if you're a leader. So Clay would say there's sort of two playbooks, and I think we've gotten really good at making this distinction. So very quickly, he would use the phrase disruptive and sustaining innovation. Sustaining innovation in Clay's book is when you're trying to play the game the way you've always played it, but better or more efficiently. So if you think about the use of technology in universities, we got a lot better. Like we don't get enough credit for the ways we've deployed technology. I mean, when I was at a little rural college in southern Vermont, Marlborough College, when we got an internet connection, when that was still a big deal, overnight, our astronomy classes could connect directly with the Hubble Space Telescope. It was amazing what that teacher could then do. We used to actually rank institutions in the US in the Chronicle of Higher Ed by the size of their library collections. Who cares? right? It's all about connectivity, not about how many volumes you have in your library. So we got better, but we didn't change the game. We're playing the game the same way, but we just got better at it. And then a second bucket of sustaining innovation would be around efficiency or cost savings. And here, universities have used technology. I'm old enough to remember when students would line up outside the gymnasium to register for a course. They had to graduate. So you'd get there at 4 a.m. and wait in line for 3 hours to make sure you get that course you wanted. It sounds crazy now. You just like register online. Everything's on your phone. So but higher ed's not really good at using technology to be more efficient. Like our technology is kind of kludgy and not great, and tech stacks are out of date, and they're getting better. But so those are the two buckets. But you don't change the game. Disruptive innovation is when you use technology to actually rewrite the rules of the game, and you can't do it from inside. So the way a well-established university can think about this, where they do want to try something really innovative, is you can't work with your people inside. You've got to do it out in the boundaries. You can do it with a program no one cares about, like, oh, we have an adult evening program or a satellite program someplace, like that's going to be our playground. You could be, as a leader, you could say, you know what, I'm going to establish a little skunk works group. I'm going to give them some space and a little bit of resources, and I'm going to make sure no one gets to bother them, and I'm going to give them the invitation to rethink what we do. This is what I've been saying a lot, right? We understand right now that universities are deploying AI across the enterprise, but they're in point solutions. So they're getting real results, productivity gains and efficiencies. It's great, right? You can develop curriculum a lot faster. You can do a whole lot, but they're not changing their model. They're using AI to get better, more efficient, improve quality. Those two buckets that Clay would call sustaining innovation. But I've been saying you also need to create a small team. As a leader, you need to create a small team, give them some resources, not a ton, and tell them you can rethink everything, be unconstrained. Like if you could just use AI any way you wanted, how would you reinvent this university? Because if they can figure that out, you can eventually bring that in and start to think about how you deploy it. And I'd rather disrupt myself than have someone else disrupt me.
And now, how do you actually, so set up a small organization, give them some resources, allow them to innovate. But let's say they do start innovating and producing some impact. How do you actually bring them back into the larger organization? Because there's literally a lot of resistance, right?
It's the hardest thing to do because the act of bringing them in, the incumbent organization treats them the way the body treats foreign tissue. It either wants to spit it back out, like, nope, not having it, or it tries to incorporate it, like hold it and like keep it, from being a threat. So, the example, Clay and I used to talk about this all the time, and I think in some ways it was in his research the least well formulated work. It was a struggle. So he would say, when you're doing disruptive innovation, first of all, don't cannibalize yourself. You really want to find non-consumers, under-consuming users. That's where you will get your traction. That's where you will grow. So you start to grow your market differently. So when the first small hard drives were created at Digital Equipment Corp, it's in his book. You'll remember this, David. Those engineers went to their bosses like, this is amazing. Like, look, we just took this big mini computer that's, pretty good size. And they said, well, how big is the drive? Like, well, it's not very big. I mean, it's only 20 megs, and how fast is that drive? Well, it's not very fast. Like, well, all right, we'll go talk to our customers. And their customers were like the U.S. Census. So like, what the hell are we going to do with that? Like, who needs that doesn't meet any of our needs. They couldn't find customers for it. So these engineers spun off and they created the first PC companies. You know who the customers were? It was you and me. Somebody at home was like, wait a minute. Yeah. I can have a computer on my desktop, like not a terminal, but a real computer. So I think about this question, yours was, how do you bring it back in? So I think the companies that have had probably the most success are the ones that eventually migrate to the new model. And there's a kind of dual innovation thing you can do. So I'd use the example of Verizon, the cell phone company in the US. Verizon was just a landline company. It was one of the old Ma Bell companies, but they broke up. The US government broke up AT&T. And Verizon was a landline company. And then it started its cell phone business. And they basically wound down one as they wound up the other. And, the incumbent business will have a long tail. Like, you don't just throw that away. You just don't shut it down overnight. Like, that's almost impossible to do. So you wind that down slowly, but you start moving your investments over into the future. and you wind up. And there may be a vestige business. I don't know what Verizon has, if there's any vestige of the landline business these days, but they reinvented themselves in that way. There are some companies that have done a pretty good job of that. I think IBM has had a reasonably good track record of reinventing itself periodically in its history, right? They were a mainframe business, and they got out of the mainframe business. They were a PC business for a while. They sold that off to Lenovo. They're a consulting business. Now they're an AI business. So there aren't a ton of great examples. There are lots of examples of people getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of the most breakthrough innovations began at another company who couldn't figure out how to bring it in, who couldn't figure out how to run with it, who didn't think it was going to actually work.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've clearly figured out how to bring it in and bring it very, very successfully.
Well, when we did SNHU, remember when I got
SNHU,
there, the campus, David, was the biggest piece, and online was a little piece.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did, I said, we're going to have to play by very different rules if I'm going to grow this thing. I moved them 2 miles away, like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Like first thing I was just like, I just got to get this away from the main campus, otherwise they're going to be like, what the hell's going on with this thing? And then I had to sort of negotiate some breathing space with the faculty and say, I need these guys to play by different rules. Like we got to operate differently. And we're going to think about curriculum development differently. And that allowed us to really separate them. And that was the only reason we had success.
So I think there's a lot of similarities then in this sort of AI and agentic AI world that we need to learn how to grapple with. We need to separate the organizations. So clearly set up a skunk works or physically separate with its own resources. But then what skills are required? What skills do these people need to be able to flourish, not just to innovate, but then once they innovate, you have to then bring them back in as well. They probably need new skills maybe, or reskilled. How would you think about that for, whether it's a university or it's even a company training its workforce?
Yeah, so it's a great question because we're so just at the starting line. So the answers aren't entirely clear. The skills that you need, I think, to do this kind of more radical rethinking. So as you said, like if Penn University said, we have lots of people who are going to play with AI and we'll make good use, but we want a small skunk works to work on this. They're going to have to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. So one is they have to stay on top of a technological revolution that is happening at high velocity. Like you just take a look at the number of releases that came out in a 2-week period in May from every provider. It's crazy. Things that you thought, we're going to be 2 years away before they have, 3 months later, there's a breakthrough and, OpenAI drops another release. Like, holy cow, like they fixed it. I remember we were doing in the platform company I'm working with now that I founded, we were doing a lot with voice agents, and the latency was a real problem. Like, no one's going to want to use this. If I asked my agent a question, that to count 1001, 1002, 1003, Paul, great question, right? Like, that's not going to work. And we had a call with the folks who were doing voice at OpenAI, and they said, give us a month. There's a drop coming, and it's going to fix it. And they fundamentally re-architected the technology. It's like, gone. So this is happening at lightning speed. So you need a group that has the technical chops to really understand what's going on. And that's, that talent is hard to find. I mean, that's data science, but it's a whole lot of other things, right? It's engineers, it's really thinking hard about that. Then you need people who conceptually can free themselves from the frameworks that they're being asked to reinvent, because that's the hardest part. When you get back to much more fundamental questions, and again, those jobs to be done questions. So when we think about AI, we're getting to questions like, what are we asking of teachers in the future? It won't be knowledge transfer. Like if you think about so much of the core identity of a faculty member is I teach you, I transfer what I know about my field so that you know about my field, your chosen field. That we'll be able to do much better with AI. And then the question, the way we've been formulating this is, then what will teachers do? Like, what's the human in this? And what we would say is that the best way we can think about this right now is we're building a platform that is sort of like the flipped classroom on steroids. So the student uses our platform to learn outside of class. Use that precious class time with no screens. That should be curated community time. That should be human time. That should be enrichment. It should be where you have to figure things out at a higher level with your peers. But in terms of learning, like how to use Python to program in Python, you go back in the platform for that. In the platform, we can give you not only the content, but we can give you the teacher, the tutor, the counselor, like everything you need, and do it at a very, very low cost. So now we're starting to rethink roles. When we started, we kind of slipped back into, hey, if we're going to teach somebody, let's create a micro-credential, 3-month micro-credential on the platform and introduction to data science. And we're like, okay, let's start curating all the content. And we're like, but wait a minute, we can use AI to do just-in-time content. And it can look very different. So we can personalize. So the content you get served up in that micro will be very different than mine because we can know about you. So we can realize genuinely personalized learning for the first time. It's long been promised. We've been disappointed again and again, but we can do it now. It's really a framework we're thinking and reimagining and being comfortable, like getting at real base core questions and assumptions. And in some ways, that's probably the most important skill. AI tools are going to empower us to do technical things really fast. Like I actually think technical jobs are going to mostly go away. The training and the education that's going to matter most are things like critical thinking, creativity, sense making, thinking across systems. And those are the skills that when you're asking people to do these reinventions, those are the skills they need to have.